You promise to give away half your fortune. 15 years pass. You're not just still rich, you're 3 times richer than when you made the promise. That's not hypothetical. 32 billionaires publicly pledged to give their money away, signed the papers, got the applause. Then, they got richer. The machinery that makes this possible is completely legal. It's also completely different from what charity means when you do it. 5 levels deep, and you'll see exactly why billionaires love giving money away. In 2010, 57 of America's wealthiest people launch the Giving Pledge. Simple idea. Promise to give away at least half your wealth during your lifetime or in your will. Public response? Overwhelmingly positive. Finally, accountability. 15 years later, the Institute for Policy Studies goes back and checks. Of those original 57 signatories, 32 are still billionaires. Already strange. But the real number? Their combined net worth grew by 283%. Adjusting for inflation, that's still 166%. They pledged to give half away. Instead, they nearly tripled what they had. Think about that mechanic for a second. You promise to have your fortune. You end up with 3 times more. For any normal person, giving away half your wealth means you have half left. Done. Finished. For them, it meant wealth accumulated faster than they could even pretend to give it away. The system isn't just allowing this. It's designed to reward it. The moment you donate to charity, you get a tax deduction. For you, a $100 donation might save $20 come tax time. Helpful, not transformative. Scale it up. Billionaire donates $10 million to their own foundation. Depending on structure and jurisdiction, they deduct that full amount from taxable income. At the highest rates, that saves millions in taxes immediately. Money that would have gone to the government stays in their ecosystem instead. Here's what doesn't appear in the press release. The money doesn't have to leave their control. When you donate $100, it's gone. You don't decide how it gets spent. You definitely don't hire your kids to manage it. They do both. The donation happens, the tax benefit is immediate, but the money stays in a structure they govern. Technically, charitable. Technically, still theirs to direct. Picture it this way. You're holding $1,000. Government says, give us $300. Instead, you put the $1,000 into a box labeled charity. Government says, you don't owe us anything. The box sits in your house. You decide when to open it, who benefits, whether it opens at all. Completely legal. Wildly different from what most people imagine when they hear, gave it away. That box is just getting started. So where does the money go after the donation? Often, nowhere. Not quickly, anyway. Billions sit in what are basically fancy parking lots for money. Donor-advised funds. Charitable savings accounts where you control when money goes out. Private foundations. Family-run grant-making operations. Charitable trusts. Wealth transfer structures with a philanthropy wrapper. All of them accumulate value, whilst nonprofits that actually do the work scrape by on constrained budgets. Donor-advised fund works like this. You put money in, get the tax deduction immediately, then recommend grants whenever you feel like it. There's no legal requirement to distribute the money. Ever. It can sit there growing indefinitely. You've given it away in the eyes of the tax office. It hasn't reached a single person in need. Private foundations have slightly stricter rules. They must distribute about 5% of their assets annually. Sounds reasonable? Until you realize that if the foundation's investments return 8%, it's still growing by 3% each year whilst technically meeting its charitable obligation. The wealth inside compounds faster than the requirement to give it away. It's wealth preservation with a philanthropy label. Meanwhile, the wealth outside these structures grows even faster. In one recent year, the Forbes 400 added $1.2 trillion to their combined net worth. That's more than Australia's entire GDP. Enough to fund the entire U.S. food stamp program for 15 years. Philanthropic giving, even when it happens, hasn't kept pace. The pledge says half. The maths says the half keeps getting bigger whilst the giving stays relatively flat. The money sits. But sitting isn't the real point. The point is what you get to do while it sits. Private foundation lets you employ family members. Your kids draw salaries as foundation staff or board members. You're technically giving to charity. They're technically employed. The family stays involved, stays compensated, stays in control of how and when the money moves. Generational wealth doesn't just transfer through inheritance. It transfers through institutional positions you built with tax-deductible donations. This next bit is genuinely strange. Some nonprofits actually prefer the delay. A $100 million unrestricted grant landing tomorrow would overwhelm most organizations. They don't have the infrastructure to deploy it effectively. So the foundation sitting on the money isn't always the villain. Sometimes it's the only thing preventing a flood of capital from drowning the very groups it's meant to help. The dysfunction has become load-bearing. Then there's influence. When you control a foundation with a 9 or 10-figure endowment, you're not just rich, you're a player. You decide which causes get funded, which organizations get grants, which researchers get backing. That's not just charity. That's shaping public discourse, funding political priorities, building leverage. The Institute for Policy Studies puts it bluntly. Some billionaires use charity to enhance their public image, their political voice, even the protection of their assets. I'll be honest, this is the part that sits wrong with me. When policy debates happen about tax rates, about regulation, about wealth concentration, foundations funded by the people those policies would affect are funding the research, the think tanks, the advocacy on both sides. You get one vote. They get a foundation that can fund the entire conversation. That's not an even playing field. That's not even the same sport. Zoom out. Look at what this does to organizations that actually deliver services. Food banks, shelters, legal aid clinics, community health centers, they operate on razor-thin margins. Many run deficits. Staff are underpaid. Programs get cut. Meanwhile, billions sit idle in philanthropic vehicles. The people running those nonprofits know exactly where the money is. It's in donor-advised funds, waiting for someone to recommend a grant. It's in private foundations distributing just enough to meet the legal minimum. It's in charitable trusts structured to delay distributions for years. Here's what that looks like in your life. Your local library cuts its hours because the council budget is tight. Your kid's public school runs a fundraiser for basic supplies. The community center down the road closes its after-school program. At the same time, $50 billion sits in foundations 3 suburbs over, growing, compounding, whilst the donors who control it get tax breaks and public credit for generosity. The system has created 2 worlds, one where people on the ground do the work with almost nothing. Another where wealth sits in charitable structures, compounding, whilst the people who donated it get tax breaks, control, and applause. This isn't a conspiracy, it's just the design. The rules were written to encourage charitable giving. They do. They just don't require that the giving actually happens on any timeline that would prevent donors from getting wealthier in the meantime. Added up, the pledge gets made. The tax deduction happens immediately. The money moves into a structure with charity on it, but stays under the donor's control. It sits there indefinitely, growing faster than the legal requirement to distribute it. The donor's public image improves. Their political influence expands. Their family stays employed. The original fortune outside the charitable structure? Still compounding. You pay taxes on your salary before you see a cent of it. If you donate, you get a modest deduction, and the money is gone. You don't get to hire your relatives with it. You don't get to decide national policy with it. You just get to feel good about helping, which is worth something, but it's worth a lot less than what they're getting. The giving pledge promised billionaires would give half their wealth away. What it actually revealed is that the system allows wealth to grow faster than generosity can theoretically catch up. 32 people proved it. They signed the pledge, collected the applause, got 283% richer. Not because they lied, because the rules let them. If this gap between what charity looks like and what it actually does feels like something more people should know about, share it. The system only stays invisible when nobody's looking at it. That's money, actually.